Okay, so now we're going to have a look at Nothing's Changed. So the context is really important here because it's all about District 6 in South Africa. So in the 1970s, the residents of District 6, so the areas of Cape Town were divided into districts, were forcibly removed from their homes to make way for white people to move into the area. So at the time, government officials gave 4 primary reasons for the removals. It stated that the interracial interaction bred conflict, necessitating the separation of the races. They deemed District 6 a slum fit only for clearance, not rehabilitation. They also portrayed the area as crime-ridden and dangerous, and they claimed that the district was a vice den full of immoral activities like gambling, drinking and prostitution. However, although these were the official reasons, most of the residents believed that the government sought the land because of its proximity to the city centre, Table Mountain and the harbour. So it was a really great location, basically. Okay, so what happens basically within the poem is that the poet, Tatum Hula Africa, returns to District 6, and on his return he expects to see, because apartheid's ended, a new, more just, less racially divided country. And what he finds when he returns is that nothing's changed, and so the poem is about him expressing his bitter disappointment that things haven't changed. And he is basically reliving the anger that he first felt when District 6 was destroyed and the black communities there were moved out. So it's very much an autobiographical poem. It's about him returning to this area, District 6, that was created as a white-only zone during the 1960s. Africa himself, he was born, he was called Nassif when he was born in Egypt to an Egyptian father and a Turkish mother, and he came to South Africa as a very young child. So his parents died of flu and he was forced to change his name as he moved between foster families. He was, and this is important, a member of Nelson Mandela's African National Congress Party, and he was arrested 5 times for terrorism offences in 1987, and he was banned from writing or speaking in public for 5 years. And that's when he adopted his 5th and final name, Tatum Hula Africa, which means grandfather Africa, under which he continued to write despite the ban. So as I've already said, okay, he expected society to become freer after apartheid, but actually what he continued to see was inequality and injustice, which was mainly due to the fact that the white minority population held all the money and they were much more affluent. Okay. It's also worth remembering, okay, when we look at this, that the black communities are the majority in South Africa, but it's that these kind of segregated white communities were the most affluent. So let's have a look at the opening verse of the poem. So small, round, hard stones click under my heels. Seeding grasses thrust bearded seeds into trouser cuffs, cans, trodden on, crunch, in tall, purple, flowering, amiable weeds. So the first thing that we need to notice is that there is a lot of sensual imagery in the opening of this poem. Okay, we've got sight, they're small round stones, we've got touch, they're hard, and we've also got sound. Okay, so that's really helping to kind of create the journey for the listener. So it's also written in the present tense. Now that's important because it's about him showing what a powerful experience it was. And by writing it in the present tense, he relives it. Now that also means that he's making it really vivid for the reader and we relive it with him. And I think the sensory imagery is also helping us to relive it with him. Okay. Interestingly, whilst we are in the present tense and we're very much reliving this memory, it's also a lot of the words in the initial verse are monosyllabic, and that really gives a kind of quite hard, unpleasant sound to the poem. So small, I've underlined them all in green for you, okay, small, round, hard, stones, click, my, heels, thrust, seeds, okay, and it carries on throughout that verse. I think that kind of monosyllabic nature also gives it a kind of percussive nature. I think potentially it shows his irritation that he's come back here, and you know what he's really emphasizing in this kind of list and this description is how untidy it is. You know, the grass is thrusting through into cuffs and cans. It's a really littered, uncared for place. There are also lots of plosive sounds here, okay, which I've circled here, the D's and the K sound as well, which adds to this kind of hard sound, which shows us that he's kind of irritated by coming back here. And you know, he started with the title Nothing's Changed, which is what he'll end with, and by starting with that, he also lays bare his kind of frustration and anger that nothing's changed here since apartheid. As well as this, okay, we've got enjambment. So remember, that's when the lines flow on from each other. And it's all very descriptive. Now, I think what that's showing is that he's perhaps, the enjambment is showing he's kind of listing it. And when we do that, often we kind of list things and we rant and rave, don't we, when we're angry. And I think that shows that kind of that aspect of him raving against it a little bit. And there's that breathlessness that comes with that kind of a rant that shows his annoyance. A couple of other little interesting things that we can look at in this beginning section. Okay, you've got more kind of plosive sounds and the K sounds here, which again kind of further that sense of irritation. Some people have picked out the kind of purple flowering weeds, saying that purple is the colour of dried blood, and what that's doing by picking the colour purple, he's showing us the kind of connotations of the violence of apartheid and reminding us of that. This last little bit's interesting. Okay, we definitely know that this is a kind of littered and untidy place, but at the end he describes the weeds as amiable, which is kind of a strange image. You know, if they're weeds, that links in with it being untidy, but the fact that they're amiable, that suggests they're kind of friendly, that they're sociable, and it kind of jars a little bit with the rest of the verse, I think. I don't know if perhaps that's him suggesting that since apartheid there has been kind of like a friendly mask, the veneer that's kind of worn over the top of society, but that actually if you scratch beneath the surface, what you see is that all of the kind of injustice and the unfairness carries on. And there's a real shift in tone here in this second verse. Let me just line that up for you. Okay, and in structure, so we get this end stopping District 6. Now we've had all of this enjambment so far previously, and then we get this very short abrupt line, end stopped. Now that abruptness really brings us to a halt as a reader and focuses our attention on District 6. It makes it a reminder that yes, this is central to the poem, but I think it's also supposed to make us stop and remember the injustices of apartheid. So no board says it. Now, it's important contextually to remember that there would have been boards up saying that, you know, there were no black people allowed in certain areas. Well, no board says it anymore, okay? So that kind of sense of apartheid is gone. But, so look at that fronted conjunction. So just because there's no board there doesn't mean that the injustice isn't there. And that's what that fronted conjunction is pointing out. But my feet know, and my hands, and the skin about my bones, and the soft labouring of my lungs, and the hot, white, inwards turning anger of my eyes. So here we get this anaphora, don't we, with the conjunction ands. It starts off and my, and then becomes and the. And I think what the narrator's doing here is he's showing that his growing anger is accumulating as he looks and sees what surrounds him. And that anger is kind of manifested in his body. So it starts off in his hands, and then it travels, first of all it's his feet, and then his hands, and the skin, and the soft labouring of my lungs. So there's that sense of labouring, that this is becoming measured, he's becoming breathless. And then that anger is really articulated here, and the hot, white, inwards turning anger of my eyes. So that what he sees here is really drives that anger that travels the whole way through his body. Now these adjectives, hot and white, bring about connotations of fire, and that really shows us how kind of destructive this anger is and how much it's raging within him. White is also interesting, isn't it, because that reminds us of race, and it reminds us for the reasons of his anger. Okay, let's look at the next verse then. So then we get a description of the restaurant that's there. So brash with glass, name flaring like a flag, it squats in the grass and weeds. Incipient Port Jackson trees, new upmarket haute cuisine, guard at the gatepost, whites only in. It's important that it's brash, okay, because what that suggests is something that's a bit tasteless, okay, it's ostentatious. Its name is flaring like a flag, so that simile shows us a kind of arrogance. It's showing off. It's also interesting to pick the simile of a flag because that reminds us of kind of like nationalism as well, and perhaps a reminder that South Africa hasn't kind of managed to acquire the sort of nationalism that it might desire, the national identity it might want. It's also then personified, this restaurant, as squatting, okay, and what that suggests is like a person defecating maybe, but it also, which is showing his contempt for it, but it also suggests if it's squatting there, it shows that it's out of place, it doesn't fit in this area. Now the Port Jackson trees are important contextually. They're Australian trees which have been shipped in there, which are really expensive, so that's what Africa does in this section, and in the whole poem, is he really shows us the affluence of white people and that segregation now comes through that kind of social inequality. We then get this triad describing the food there. So it's new, it's upmarket, it's haute cuisine. Okay, so really the triad is emphasizing the kind of the wealth and the affluence of this restaurant. There's a guard at the gatepost. Okay, we've got some alliteration there as well, haven't we? Around guards and gateposts. So that's really reminding us of the kind of the segregation that exists, even though apartheid is carried on. There's guards there to check that only wealthy people can get in. And then that's clarified with why it's only in. So the segregation that would have happened under apartheid is still there, but because of the wealth, and that's what he's so angry about. So if we shift back up even, it's clarified in this shorter verse here. Okay, so structurally this is important that it's only 2 lines because it stands out. So no sign says it, but we know where we belong. So apartheid's over, but segregation's continued. The tone here, we know where we belong, is sardonic, isn't it? You know, sarcastic. It's clear that they don't belong at this whites only inn, which is for the affluent people. And there's also use of the collective pronoun we, so there's a sense that he's speaking out for the black community here. And he carries on in the first person then, I press my nose. And that's important in the present tense because, again, we're going through this experience with him. He's reliving it and it's happening in real time. To the clear panes, no, before I see them, there will be crushed ice-white glass, linen falls, the single rows. I mean, what he's emphasizing here is the affluence and the prestige of the restaurant. But these images of the clear plains, the white glass, the linen falls, everything's white here as well, isn't it? So emphasizing that that affluence is something that belongs to the white people. Except for the single rows, which isn't said to be read, but which we kind of as the reader assume to be read because roses often are, particularly in restaurants. And if we assume it to be read, it's interesting in terms of its connotations, hasn't it? A rose anyway has got connotations of love and kind of fits in with that kind of maybe sense of going out for a romantic meal. But it's also got connotations of blood if it's a red rose, which is going to remind us of their bloody history. And then we get this really clear juxtaposition between the affluent whites-only restaurant and the working man's cafe. Okay, and we get this preposition down the road, which makes it clear it's somewhere else. Okay, it's the working man's cafe, so that's important too. It's a clear juxtaposition with the affluence, which we've heard of previously. It sells bunny chow, so one of the kind of South Africa's main national dishes. Okay, take it with you, eat it at a plastic table's top, wipe your fingers on your jeans, spit a little on the floor. It's in the bones. Okay, so we have now shifted to the second person. So that's interesting because it positions us alongside the black community at the working man's cafe. And so I think he's really kind of trying to emote our empathy here by doing that. You wipe your fingers on your jeans, so that's a direct kind of comparison with the linen that existed in the affluent place. Spit a little on the floor, so that tells us that, you know, this is very different to the kind of upmarket haute cuisine. This is interesting. It's in the bone, suggesting that it is somehow what natural for them to be kind of be spitting on the floor because they're in this position of poverty. I think that that's angry and it's derisive, and that actually, rather than suggesting that this is just how the black community behaves, I think what he's suggesting is what's in the bone is this division and this poverty, and that they just can't escape it. Okay, last verse then. I back from the glass, boy again, leaving small mean O of small mean mouth, hands burn, for a stone, a bomb, to shiver down the glass. Nothing's changed. So this is making it clear to him, to us as the reader, that he is reliving this, that it takes him back to his childhood when District 6 and when people were evicted from District 6. The repetition of small mean here is really emphasizing the kind of anger that he felt. I mean, the O of the mouth suggests both shock, doesn't it? That then becomes anger because it's so unfair. Hands burn. Now this metaphor is returning to the idea of anger as fire, isn't it? And so his anger is now manifesting itself because he wants to destroy the restaurant. He wants a stone or a bomb, and that's a direct reference to the ANC who would have committed acts of terrorism, to shiver down the glass. Now I think this glass is also potentially metaphorical, okay, because it kind of symbolizes the division between the races that still exist in South Africa at the time. It's interesting verb choice, shiver rather than shatter. It's kind of slightly diminishes the idea of it being a bomb. It makes it seem like something more natural, so maybe kind of minimizes the violence a little bit more. And then what's really important is that we end with this cyclical structure. The title was Nothing's Changed. The last line of the poem is Nothing's Changed. Both of these lines are end stopped to draw our attention to nothing's changed, that short abrupt line, just like District 6, okay? And that is returning to this idea that this is a never-ending cycle of oppression, and that's what he's really angry about, that nothing's changed since apartheid has ended.